All right, let's talk some Reformation. Um, the Reformation is cited as being the beginning of modern Europe, largely because it crippled the political influence of the church and gave rise to the modern nation state. That is like the big overriding consequence of the Reformation, that the church will no longer be a major political influence really after the Reformation is all wrapped up. We'll see the rise of modern nation states, which gives us, ideas like republics and democracy in modern days today. Okay, now Protestantism, right, protesting against the church, was adopted by states in Northern Europe and to some extent in Central Europe. Okay, the immediate influence is that it rekindled religious enthusiasm, but like I said, in the long run, it's going to kind of lead to the decline of religious thought. Okay, so there was a Catholic counter-Reformation. So what happened was Martin Luther over here started the Reformation, began Protestantism, and then later on the Catholics are going to have their own Reformation to counter or go against Protestantism. Okay, so it's for the survival of the Catholic Church. Okay, so now it destroyed the religious unity of Western Europe, and there were just absolutely devastating wars throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. So let's talk about the Protestant Reformation. Its causes lay in the later Middle Ages. Of course, the Babylonian captivity and the Great Schism destroyed the prestige of the church. It made it look like a big mess. Remember, the Holy Roman Emperor at the time had to step in and appoint the correct pope. And the conciliar movement, that movement where they wanted like a whole bunch of councils of Christians to help guide the church to reform it, failed. People began to see the church as corrupt, abusive of power, and here's why. Now, just bear in mind, we're not talking about Catholicism. We're talking about the people alive at this time in the Catholic Church who are making very bad choices, okay? There was simony, which is the sale of church offices. You're going to need to know these bold words, so maybe jot these down in your notes or make sure you're putting them in your vocabulary, okay? Pluralism, means more than one. So sometimes church officials would hold two offices at a time, which it's really hard to do your job. It would be like if I were your history teacher and the principal. I'd be pretty crummy history teacher and principal at the same time, right? Because I'd have to be at meetings during class or something, okay? Absenteeism, sometimes they just kind of didn't show up. They also just sort of received payments for privileges. So they were sort of taking bribes on the side for, making sure your loved one goes to heaven. Yeah, give me $10 and I'll be sure that I say this special prayer for you. Going along with that, there's the sale of indulgences. So people paid the church to absolve their sins or sins of their loved ones, right? Johann Tetzel, every coin in the coffer rings, ding ding, a soul from purgatory springs. So they were so if you think you have a loved one who might not be in heaven yet, if you pay us, we'll make sure that happens. Just want to point out to you that the sale of indulgences, it's based loosely on something in the New Testament, but there is no actual textual basis for indulgences in the New Testament. So I just wanted to clear that up. Okay, nepotism, which is when you favor family members over church to be appointed to church offices. And then there was a moral decline in the papacy. There were sexual affairs. They were in the tabloids. Okay, a lot of crazy stuff going on. And the clergy itself, sometimes they didn't know Latin. Sometimes they would just go up there and kind of mutter, blah, la, 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 and they would just make stuff up because nobody else was literate either. So how are they going to know? So not looking very good just before the Protestant Reformation. All right. Critics of the church. Remember John Wycliffe. He's not going away. He was from England. These are his dates. He's look, the Bible is the sole authority for religion. So church, I can't give you a lot of credit. I have to only look to the Bible here. So he stressed personal communication with God. All these mysticism movements and that Imitation of Christ book was published to help people get a relationship with God. He translated the Bible to English, which diminished the importance of the church, and his followers, of course, are called Lollards, which I don't know why it's not showing up in the thing, but Lollards, Lollards. Okay, so here's Wycliffe giving poor priests his translation of the Bible to spread his ideas. And of course, we've talked about Jan Hus. He was burned at the stake. He had the same, basically similar views as Wycliffe. He is still a modern Czech hero. They have a day dedicated to, there's Jan Hus Day today. If you go to the Czech Republic this summer, I can't remember exactly the day, it's July something. In 2014, you will celebrate Jan Hus Day. Okay. This is going to be important to remember for the 30 Years' War. Now, there were all these, you guys remember Thomas à Kempis, we've kind of talked about this, we talked about in Praise of Folly. This is going to be very influential over Luther, okay? Erasmus is in Praise of Folly, where he talks about how beautiful the spirit of children is and how we need to get back to that innocence in religion. Luther is hugely influenced by that, and of course in Praise of Folly, Erasmus criticizes the corruption of the church and the hypocrisy of the clergy. So he laid the egg that Luther hatched, okay? Here's our man Erasmus, he's just chilling there. All right, laid the egg that Luther hatched. Now remember that there was Christian humanism in the Northern Renaissance, which would include the Germanies, which is what we're talking about here. Luther is German. They criticized the church and questioned the Latin version of the Bible. Valla proved, remember Lorenzo Valla was the language expert who proved that the donation of Constantine that gave the church like tons of power was actually falsified, okay? And so this sort of undermined or took power and authority away from the Catholic Church. Italian Renaissance's worldly influence on church leaders grew criticism because, you know, they're getting in on all this art stuff too. They want to have like beautiful paintings of themselves and their family, and it makes them seem much more human and corruptible and less religious and holy. John Calvin will be a big player. He will build off of Zwingli's ideas. Both of these people are humanists, okay? Zwingli here is influenced, okay, by the Greek edition of the New Testament, and John Calvin, after Zwingli is killed during a religious battle later on that we'll talk about, Calvin sort of picks up the torch and helps create the Reformed Church, which will later be known as Calvinism. Okay, so big impact of humanism. After Luther's Reformation, and remember Lutheranism started all of this, humanists turned many monasteries into schools, and printing press, I cannot stress enough the importance of the printing press. The printing press is like basically solely responsible for the spread of the Reformation. All this stuff would have happened anyway, right, with Luther and all that, but had it not been for the printing press quickly distributing information, the Reformation probably would have failed. So who is this Martin Luther guy? Martin Luther is one of my favorite people to talk about. This guy had issues. He was so just critically obsessed with being perfect and being saved, and he always felt like he was never good enough. Like he's like, oh man, I'm gonna go to hell. Like I really want to be a really much better Christian, and I just don't know what to do with myself, and I'm so sad. And so he was like constantly, desperately looking for something that would make him feel that he could attain salvation. He was an Augustinian monk, right? He was a professor at the University of Wittenberg in Saxony, part of Germany. Now, this guy, Johann Tetzel, encouraged by Pope Leo X, is going around selling indulgences. This guy over here, this is every coin in the coffer rings, ding ding, the soul from purgatory springs. Now, indulgences were payments to get you basically out of purgatory. It's sort of like a get out of jail but not for free card. And you could purchase them for yourself or for basically for loved ones is what you did. Oh, I'm worried about my Aunt Sue. You know, she might still be in purgatory. I want to make sure she goes to heaven. Okay, so they were doing this to pay for St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, interestingly enough. So we just said this like 5 times. Here's a print of people lining up to, give their gold for indulgences. Here is a copy, this must be in Latin here. Okay, so here's another primary source. This is an etching from the time showing Johann Tetzel selling indulgences, and he's like, ding ding, put money in my box. Okay. So Pope Leo, I missed that completely, sorry. Here we go. Pope Leo is looking for revenues. We just talked about that. Okay. 95 Theses. So Martin Luther's like, look, I am really upset with this. This is unfathomable to me that the church can be this corrupt. This is not the way to salvation. And in fact, I'm even questioning the holiness and the sanctity of the Pope. So I'm going to write these 95 criticisms or theses of the church, and I'm going to nail them to the door at Castle Church in Wittenberg, Germany. Okay? The printing press, like I said, printed more copies of the 95 Theses, of course with Luther's permission, and spread these ideas with, like I said, astonishing speed. Now, initially, the Pope saw the debate, over the indulgences, completely insignificant. But Luther refused to stop his crusade, and Frederick of Saxony, and we'll talk about why in a moment, protected him from suffering the same fate as our friend Jan Hus. Frederick of Saxony was, of course, a local leader. Germany is decentralized just like Italy, so he's not a king, he's like a prince. And he stands to benefit financially and with land if the church loses power. So, of course, he's going to protect Luther. That would be his his bias or his point of view. It is in his best interest that the church lose power, so he's going to protect Luther, okay? Now, at this point, Luther doesn't want to start his own religion. Like, he just wants to reform the church. Then he gets baited, right? He gets baited into this debate with this guy, Johann Eck at Leipzig, okay, in 1519, and he denied the infallibility of the Pope. He's like, dude, the Pope can be wrong. And Johann Eck is like, dude, no, he can't. And Luther's like, absolutely he can. And then he even went so far as to say that it was terrible that the church murdered, executed Jan Hus. How could you have done that? And Jan Eck, of course, denied. No, he was a heretic. It was a public and a very heated debate. And here it is. Luther versus, I don't know which is which in this picture. I'm thinking that this is Luther versus Eck here. And Eck's like, dude, what you doing? And Luther's like, I'm holier than thou. I know what I'm talking about. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so then 1520, he finally says, you know what, I've had it. I'm rejecting all this stuff. There's no, good works cannot be the means to salvation, because what if you're blind? What if you've befallen some horrible crippling injury? Like, it's not about good works, it's about what you feel on the inside. It's about accepting God in your heart, okay? That's what God looks for. It's faith, by faith alone, salvation through faith alone, right? The Bible is the ultimate authority, not the Pope, not the church. Baptism and communion were the only two valid sacraments of the original 7. So he rejected 5 of them, including marriage, which is important because, of course, in Lutheranism you can marry if you are part of the church. He rejected transubstantiation, which is like the body and blood of Christ thing, and he advocated for consubstantiation, which is like, let's just imagine that God's presence is with us when we feel him in our heart, okay? So let's keep going here. He advocated for a priest, oh Lord, Megan, come on, a priesthood of all believers, not a hierarchical structure. Everybody is equally as important within the Lutheran idea of the church. He criticized, of course, the sale of indulgences and all of these other church corruptions, and he encouraged the princes of Germany to reform the church in their estates. And of course, the German princes, hungry for money and land, are like, sure, Luther, most of them who are not terribly devout religious Catholics, they're very Machiavellian, decide this is absolutely a great idea. If we get on the Luther boat here, we stand to gain in money and land, okay? So he also rejected the monastic tenets of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and really, who likes that, right? Unless you're super religious, that's not terribly appealing, so you can see how he had some widespread appeal here, politically and with the people. Well, that about did it. So in 1520, Pope Leo said, that's enough, Luther, you're done, you're excommunicated. And for those of you who don't know, excommunication means you're kicked out of the church and you're condemned to go to hell. And Luther took the papal, it was called the bull, not because he thought it was BS, but it was just called, it was like another word for a document. He took the papal bull and he threw it into the fire and said, you have no authority, okay? So here are some woodcuts showing, you should pause and take a look at these because I'm just going to keep going. All right. The Diet of Worms is not something that he did for penance. A diet is called a meeting. It is another word for a meeting. And in 1521, he got together with the Holy Roman Empire, Charles V. Charles V, absolutely know who Charles V is. He is Charles V, a Habsburg. He is like the tantamount huge leader of the Holy Roman Empire, and you need to know him from now and forever. I'll never forget Charles V. Charles V is a fervent Catholic, and he demands that Luther recant his writings. So here you have a political figure stepping in to defend the Catholic Church at this time. So Luther refused. Here I stand, I cannot do otherwise. Edict of Worms. Now, as a result of that, Luther was outlawed as a heretic by the Holy Roman Empire. I said that badly, heretic. And Luther was then kidnapped and taken to Frederick the Wise's castle where he was protected. So he kind of stays holed up with Frederick of Saxony, and he starts writing. And he uses that printing press to get his writings out there. In fact, he translated the entire Bible into German vernacular in 1523, which democratized religion. It gave people access to religion this way. In 1530, he wrote the Confession of Augsburg. Just kidding, he didn't. But it was written by Philip, Melon something, okay, as an attempt to compromise between the Lutheran and Catholic princes in Germany, but it failed. So what happened is they kind of got together in 1530, and Luther was there, and they all got together, and they're like, look, isn't there just some way we can work this out? Is there some way that you guys can just go be Catholic and we can go be Lutheran and we don't have to just kill each other? And it failed, but what it did accomplish is the Confession of Augsburg became the official statement of the Lutheran Church. And if there are any Lutherans in the class, I'm certain that you have encountered the Confessions of Augsburg in church at some point. So it advocated essentially salvation through faith alone, and that the Bible is the sole authority. It also advocated for a priesthood of all believers. So it goes against the Pope and the whole church hierarchy. It goes against the legitimacy of the Pope and the priesthood. And it gives access to salvation to everyone. All right. Now, this caused a political battle to ensue over Lutheranism throughout Germany. Because remember, Germany is not a unified country. There are all like thousands of different, they're called principalities. They're like chunks of land ruled by princes, okay? Similar like to Italy. And it spread Lutheranism. Some German states loved Lutheranism. Some were very devout and fervent Catholics, mostly in southern Germany. Like I said, the German princes are politically motivated. This is very important to remember. It will probably pop up on a test. Okay, Denmark and Sweden became Lutheran states, like I said, Northern Europe, and Lutheranism did not spread much beyond these regions. However, Calvinism will, but we'll get to that. Now, Charles V sought to stop the spread of Protestantism and preserve the hegemony or the unity, the powerful unity of Catholicism. So Charles was sort of like a medieval emperor in that sense. Now, the Turkish threat, because remember the Ottoman Empire is still around, they're actually thriving and doing much better than Europe. So they're still hungry for land, no pun intended. So they're threatening to take over Hungary. And so Charles V is fighting wars with the Ottoman Empire. He's also, if you remember, fighting wars with France, because France and Spain right now are enemies. Charles V is the Holy Roman Empire, which means he rules in Spain and in Central Europe. All of those German princes are supposed to listen to Charles V. Okay, he's like the head dude. Okay, but he's caught up with the Habsburg-Valois War. The Habsburg-Valois Wars are the wars that ended the Italian Renaissance because it gave control over Italy, the Italian different states, to either France or Spain, depending on who was winning the war at which time. So Charles V militarily is being stretched in multiple directions. Let's see. Let's talk about the Peasant Revolt. We're almost done here. So now the German Peasant Revolt lasted for about a year. This is the Swabian peasants. Please remember Swabian peasants. If I didn't make that a vocab term, make it a vocab term. These Swabians, which is just an ethnic group, okay, demanded the end of serfdom and tithes, which is payments to the Catholic Church. You're supposed to take 10% of your income and give it to the church. They're trying to get rid of other feudal, like medieval practices that oppressed the peasantry and kept them in poverty. Now, they were inspired by Luther because Luther rebelled, right? He's leading a rebellion against the church, but in Luther's mind, he's not a rebel. In Luther's mind, he's a reformer. Like, he's reforming things, and the Catholic Church has just chosen not to reform. He, although initially is supportive of the peasants, as soon as the peasants became violent, condemned them. And you can see here that there were peasant revolts everywhere. Now, I want to go back. Like I said, at first, Luther was all about, he's like, yeah, like, you know, you should absolutely not have to pay tithes to the church and la la la. But as soon as they turned violent, he just condemned them. He talked about the savage hordes of peasant horribleness. I can't remember. I'll show the title in class. It's a really colorful title. Now, in northern Germany, we have something called, oh, this is a fun word, the League of Schmalkalden, okay, the League of Schmalkalden in 1531, and it was formed by the newly Protestant princes to defend themselves from Charles V's drive to re-Catholicize Germany. Now, France is, this is so funny, so France will always do this. France is also fervently Catholic. They're going to oppress the heck out of the Protestants that live there, but they hate Spain so much that they actually help this Lutheran Northern European League. How cool is that? So like I said, the Habsburg-Valois Wars are going on right now. Until, yeah, these dates here, okay, you see the beautiful dates. This is them fighting over Italy. France is trying to keep Germany divided because if France divides Germany, it weakens the Holy Roman Empire. It weakens the Habsburgs, okay? It resulted in this long-term political fragmentation of Germany, and in fact, Germany and Italy will not unify as countries until the 19th century, okay? So, Catholic unity will never happen again. Did I miss something important? Yeah, Charles wins some battles, loses the war, because obviously Lutheranism is still around. Now, this is where we're going to stop today. The Peace of Augsburg, 1555. This is something that you should commit to memory. Write this in your heart. 1555 is the Peace of Augsburg. You need to know this really well because there will be other treaties that are similar to this, and they all build off of the Peace of Augsburg, so you really don't want to get confused here, okay? So the Peace of Augsburg, 1555, temporarily ended the struggle in Germany over Lutheranism. So here was the deal. Each prince was allowed to choose to be either Lutheran or Catholic. There were other new religions, and I mentioned Calvinism earlier, and we'll talk about that more a bit later. Calvinism was not on this bill. You could be Lutheran or Catholic. Protestants living in Catholic states were allowed to move to Protestant states. However, if you live, like if I am like Millerstein and you live in Millersteinville and I am Catholic, you must be Catholic or you are in deep trouble. Yes? Okay. So the result is that there was a permanent religious division of Germany. We will pick up the next day tomorrow with the spread of Protestantism. Please come prepared to class with your vocabulary terms that we discussed here in this lecture or in your reading completed and your vocabulary chart. And make sure that you've taken your Cornell notes. And let me know, of course, if you have any questions.